when we're away. Then inshallah stay behind and wait for us to come back with the extensive Q&A session.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What I basically just said for the non-Muslims present amongst us, our friends here today, is may the peace, blessings and mercy of God be upon all of you. Now, can everyone hear me clearly, just to make sure? Everything, audio's fine? Yeah? Okay, a bit louder, fine. Okay, I'll speak louder. I have this tendency to start off very low and then inshallah I'll sort of get a bit louder as we go along. So the topic that we're addressing today, inshallah, is the existence of God in the 21st century, right? Is God relevant in the 21st century? It's a very interesting question. And the simple answer to this question is yes. Quite simply. The answer is yes. Now, what I'm going to be sharing with you, inshallah, today is reasons as to why the answer is yes, at least from my perspective. So, the first thing I want you guys to do, inshallah, or what I want all of us to do, God willing, is to think about this question from a existential perspective. So what do I mean by an existential perspective? What I mean is from the perspective of our very existence. What does it mean to deny the existence of God? What does that really mean? What I want us to think about is the absurdities of life in the absence of God. Right? Because this is something most of us don't consider, because we're so busy these days, we get occupied with our lives and our busy schedules that we don't really stop and think about these questions. Very important questions. I want to pose 3 questions. In the absence of God, what does it mean? What does life mean? Is there absolute meaning to life? The second thing, is there absolute purpose in life? And the third question is, can we actually be happy if God does not exist? Or if we claim or hold the position and maintain the position that God does not exist? 3 very important questions. And let's think about this for a second. What does it mean? What does it mean to be alive in the absence of God? Think about this for a second. If that helps in any way. Anyway, so think about this for a second. What does it mean? What does life mean in the absence of God? I'm sure if you really think about this and ponder over this, what you'll realize is that pretty much nothing. Life doesn't have really any absolute meaning anymore, because what does it mean for you to dedicate your life to a charitable cause, or to dedicate your life in serving humanity, or to dedicate your life in removing oppression from this world, or doing charity work, or whatever it may be? What does it mean? What would be the difference if you just lived your life as, say for example, a murderer, an evil person, someone who rapes, a rapist? Because the reality is the end of both of these groups of people is what? What's the end? Death. The grave. If all we are in the absence of God is matter, we're an accident. The reality is, brothers, sisters and friends, we're an accident. We're an accidental byproduct of a lengthy evolutionary process. We have no meaning. We weren't supposed to be here. We just ended up here through some random processes. We have no meaning. So whether you live your life as a saint or whether you live your life as a sinner, it doesn't really matter. Your end is the grave. 6 foot under, being eaten by worms, maggots, and God knows what other creatures. Rotting away underground, and before you know it, you won't even exist. Nothing about you would exist. So is there real meaning? There is no absolute meaning to life in the absence of God. Is there absolute purpose to life? This is another question. Is there absolute purpose to our lives? Now, generally when someone's asked a question, what's the purpose of your life? We come up with many answers. For example, someone may say, I want to be a doctor. I want to be an engineer, right? Or I want to be someone who dedicates my life to doing charity, just helping people around the world, trying to remove oppression and doing these things. We can attribute purpose to our lives, right? It's very easy to attribute purpose to our lives, but what's the ultimate purpose? There is no ultimate purpose in the absence of God. The claim that I want to be a doctor, an engineer, an astronaut, or whatever it may be, this is a self-delusion. We're distracting ourselves. We're just making this up as we go along. It's just a subjective idea that we have. That's all it is. There's no ultimate purpose. There is no ultimate purpose. Like we said in the beginning, we're an accident. If you're an accident, you're not here for no purpose. You didn't come into existence for a purpose. Think about it from another perspective. Can we truly be happy? Let's address this point. Can we truly be happy in the absence of God? This is very interesting. Let me give you a scenario. Think for a second that you went to sleep earlier on today, and you wake up in a train. The train's moving. You look around you, and what you notice is that you're in the most beautiful train that you've ever been in. It's this amazing train, first class service, amazing food. You're sitting on the most comfortable chair you ever sat in your life. You'll probably be happy. You'll probably enjoy it for a while. But could you truly be happy in this situation when you don't know how you got on the train, you don't know where the train's going, and you don't know where the train's going to stop, where it's taking you? Can you truly be, ask yourself this question really, can you truly be happy if you don't have the answers to these questions? On the surface, you may distract yourself for a while, enjoy the food, listen to the music or the nasheeds for the Muslims, yeah? Something like this. Yeah, but for a while, that's temporary. Can we ultimately truly be happy not knowing how we got on this train, where the train's going, and where I'm going to end up? We can't. And that's the reality of life. We're born, we don't choose our birth, we don't choose to be born, we don't choose our families, we don't choose our societies, where we live, we don't choose if we're male or female, we don't choose anything. We literally don't choose anything. We're just thrown into this reality. We wake up, and we see people around us, we see social norms, and we just conform. But in the absence of God, neither do we have any true meaning, nor any true purpose, nor true happiness, if we really think about it. So let's move on. Let's address another point. And I think this point is very crucial, and that is the existence of God Himself. Right? The question whether God is relevant in the 21st century or in any century for that matter is fundamentally pegged on the question whether God exists. Does God exist? This is a fundamental question. Now, from the Islamic tradition, from Islam, we believe God exists, and we believe there are really good reasons to believe in the existence of God. Okay, cool. Yeah, I've got a very bad habit of moving around from place to place, so I've just been warned to stay put in one place, inshallah. So I'll try my best, inshallah, to stay here. So going back to the point, the whole concept or the idea of whether God is relevant is essentially pegged on the fact that does God exist? Is there good reasons to believe in the existence of God? Now, from the Islamic perspective, the Islamic tradition is based on two things. It's based on faith and belief, but it's also based on rational and logical reasoning. There are good reasons we believe from the Islamic tradition to believe in the existence of God. I'll share two with you today, just briefly. One is the Quranic argument for the existence of God. Now, this is a very profound argument because it's found in the Quran itself. It has its origins in the Quran. In chapter 52, verse 35 and 36, God makes a profound statement. He says, were they created by nothing? Or were they the creators themselves? Or did they create the heavens and the earth? Right? Now, the scholars, the exegetes, they've studied these verses, and what they've said is that this applies to human beings, but this logical deduction that's been given, these options, they can be applied to anything that begins to exist. So let's do a little exercise. Let's apply these options, these deductions, to the universe itself. Now, it's quite safe to say, and we can discuss in the Q&A, that the universe began to exist. Right? Empirically and philosophically, we have good reasons to believe that the universe began to exist. So if the universe began to exist, let's apply this criteria. Could the universe come from nothing? Think about this for a second. And when we say nothing, we mean absolute nothing, universal negation. Not something, not energy. Could the universe come from nothing? Could anything come from nothing for that matter? Could anything come from nothing? No. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Philosophers have agreed with this concept for centuries. I mean, if you, for example, you wake up in the morning to eat your breakfast and you have an empty bowl in front of you, are you going to have a breakfast? No, because there's nothing there. You're not going to get nothing. So out of nothing, nothing comes. The universe could not have come from nothing. What was the second option? Were they the creators themselves? Let's think about this. Could you create, or could the universe create itself? Or again, for that matter, could anything create itself? Really think about this. First option is illogical, doesn't work. Second option, does it work? Could something create itself? I'm looking for an answer. No? Okay. Now, can anyone tell me why? Sorry, bro? Yes, but there's a more particular reason. Why is it absurd to believe that something could create itself? Sorry? Yes, but there's a more important point. The point that we have to understand here is to create yourself. What do you have to do? You have to exist in the first place. Yeah? And if you exist in the first place, then you're not really creating yourself because you already exist. So it's not only illogical, but it's a self-contradiction. It doesn't work at all. So self-creation doesn't work. What was the third option? Allah says, or did they create the heavens and the earth? Right? Now what's being applied here is that could something created create something? This works. This is logically possible. Something created can create something. For example, as human beings, we are created and we create things as well. Yes? So here's the thing. If we accept this, we run into many problems if we apply this to the universe. If we say the universe was created by something created, what stops us from saying, what created that something that was created? Then what stops us from saying, what created that something that created that something that created the universe? Do you see the point? Then what stops us from saying, what created that something that created that something that created that something that created the universe? And we can go on for ad infinitum. We can go on forever. But there's a big problem here because we run into the problem of an infinite regress. If we had an infinite chain of causes to the universe would not come into existence. I would not be here talking to you guys today. You would not be here listening. I'll give you a simple example to put this into perspective. Say I want to go home on the way back home today, I want to go on the bus, right? Now for me to go on the bus, I need to borrow £1. I don't have any money on me. So I asked this brother sitting here, Salahuddin, I asked him, I said, brother, give me £1. He turns around and he says to me, I will give you £1 if the guy behind me gives me £1. The guy behind him says, I will give you £1, Salahuddin, if the guy behind me gives me £1. The guy behind him says, I will give you £1, brother in the beautiful purple jumper, if the guy behind me gives me £1. Right? And if this went on forever, infinite, through the back of this auditorium, straight out the wall, forever, for an infinite chain, would I ever get on the bus? I.e., would the event of me getting on the bus ever take place? No. So in the same way, if the universe had an infinite chain of causes, the universe would not come into existence in the first place. So what are we left with? The only fourth rational option we're left with is the universe was caused or created or brought into existence by an uncaused eternal cause. That's the most rational inference we can make, and it's simple reasoning. It's very simple reasoning. And this is the mercy of Allah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does some amazing things in the Quran. Because the Quran is a book which really makes you think as a human being. It addresses not only the heart, but it addresses the intellect. And look at the mercy of the Creator here, because He could easily say, I exist. Right? But what He does, He takes you through the process. He gives you all the logical, rational options, so you go through them in your mind until you're satisfied that the only thing that works, or the only possibility that exists, is that the Creator exists, which is uncaused. An uncaused cause created the universe. That's how simple it is. I'll give you another example. Now that satisfies the intellect. I'm going to give you an example or an argument from the fitrah. And this is a profound argument. Now, the argument basically states that to believe in God, you don't need an argument. That's how profound this argument is. Because the belief in God is a properly basic belief. Now I'll define these terms because these may be words that you've not heard of before, and so on. So what do I mean by properly basic belief? A properly basic belief is a belief that's not based on other beliefs and doesn't require any information transfer. Those are the two key points. Now I'll give you an example of a properly basic belief. A properly basic belief is that the real world exists. The world that we live in, the real world exists. Now this is a properly basic belief, and it's an axiom of science. It's an unproven assumption. Science has to accept this before you can do science. But science cannot prove this fact. You cannot prove that the real world exists. But it's a core belief. It's a base belief that's not based on other beliefs and doesn't require any information transfer. In the same way, the belief in a supreme creator that created everything is a properly basic belief because it doesn't require any information transfer, nor is it based on other beliefs. Now take the example of a group of children, you put them on a desert island and they grow up on a desert island without any external influence. Right? And Justin O'Barrett, he's a professor from Oxford University, he's written a book called Born Believers. It's a very interesting book. And what he points out is that children naturally and rapidly develop the belief in God. They don't require any information transfer. It's a natural state. We naturally acquire this belief. Exactly why, or the theories that have been proposed to why this happens is irrelevant. The point is that this does happen. Children naturally acquire a belief in a supreme creator or a cause, and they attribute purpose to things. Right? And this is supporting evidence. The science is showing us. But what is profound is that the Prophet ﷺ, over 1400 years ago, and it's mentioned in the Quran as well, he said that every child is born on the fitrah. Now the fitrah, in not too many words, is this innate disposition. It's this innate disposition that every single human being is born with, is to recognize that there must be a cause. There must be a creator. There's one unique cause of the universe that we cannot imagine, cannot put into, comprehend or put into a model that we may conceive in our heads. And this has been supported by the evidence that's coming forward. So the belief in God is a properly basic belief. Now, some of you might be saying right now, well, okay, why can't I believe that a pink rhino created the universe? That I can say that's a properly basic belief. Or that a blue elephant created the universe, right? But go back to the example of the children on the desert island. They will not naturally grow up believing in a pink rhino who created the universe or a blue elephant that created the universe. It's not a natural state of human beings. Alvin Plantinga, he's a philosopher and a theologian, he studied this, and what he said in addressing this argument, he talks about the great pumpkin, right? And what he says is that believing in a great pumpkin that created everything is not an innate position. It's not a natural belief that we formulate, like the belief that the real world exists or that a cause, a supernatural agent exists. So these beliefs require information transfer. So it's perfectly rational and logical to believe in the existence of a creator, a cause, without any evidence or argumentation. But that's not to say we don't have reasons to believe rationally and logically in the existence of God as Muslims. As we presented the first argument. So let's move on. And let's think about this now. If God exists, and we have good reasons to believe in the existence of God, and there are several arguments, I've just shared two with you, then what does that mean? What does that imply? What implications does that hold? Because the reality is, if God exists, and we have these innate questions that we ask, where did I come from? Where am I going? Why am I here? If we have these questions, then it is only God by definition who will have the answers, because He is the creator, He is the cause that created everything and brought everything into existence. And He knows everything. And He has the answers. And this, if we think about this, and if we look at the need for revelation, and this brings about the need for revelation, because one of the reasons is because as human beings, we have this innate questioning within us. We ask these questions, where did I come from, where am I going, so on and so forth. And at the same time, we don't have the answers. Philosophers have argued and discussed this for centuries, they haven't been able to come up with answers. So if we've been created by a creator, then surely He must have provided us with the answers and revelation. I mean, to put this into perspective, we could really appreciate this. Think about it from a human perspective. When human beings, limited creatures, when we produce something or when we make something, a product, whether it may be a TV, a refrigerator, a kettle, whatever it may be, out of the mercy within our hearts and the responsibility we feel and the need to inform, we write what? An instruction manual for that particular product. We don't have to, but we do. Because we know what's best for the product, so we can advise and guide the user of the product. And that's human beings. Now when it comes to the Creator, God, as we know in Islam, He is the merciful, the most giving, the most loving. If He's all these things and far more than we can ever be, then surely He must have provided us with some sort of instructions, some sort of answers. We have no reason to claim that God would just create us and leave us there. Do you see? It doesn't make sense. And if He exists, it's profound. And the existence of God is necessary because He is the only route we can get these answers to. And what does He tell us in the Quran? And maybe we'll have the time to discuss why we believe the Quran is a miracle. Maybe in the Q&A we can go into this. But what does He tell us in the Quran? He answers these profound questions in a simple way. He said that He created mankind and jinn to worship Him. Simple. Worship. And now just before I move on, just to briefly sort of highlight what this word means, because it's particularly in the West, in the context we live in, the words such as worship and slavery have a very negative connotation to them. But in Islam, the word worship and submission doesn't have this negative connotation. We don't have this problem because this is true servitude to God. Worship doesn't just mean praying 5 times a day in Islam. Worship is comprehensive. Everything we do in our lives, for example, if we help the poor, give charity, take care of the elderly, do anything, it's a form of worship once we understand and recognize our Creator. So before we drift off topic, I just noticing, I have this bad habit of doing this, right? I start off a topic and I just go off on a tangent. So inshallah, I'll come back to the point. So the point is this, right? If God has created us and He exists, then it's necessary that we look for the answers from Him, because the questions that we asked, only He can provide us with the answers to those questions. Only He can. It's not going to come from a human subjective perspective. The answer's not going to come from human beings. All we can do is guess and make up subjective ideas and ideologies that we follow. Now, another thing, just before I move on, and I think this is a very important point, is that generally these days what happens is that as soon as you talk to anyone about Islam, they may agree with everything. They may agree, okay, it's rational, it makes sense, and so on and so forth. But the problem they sometimes have is this idea of submission and worship to the Creator, right? I don't want to submit, I want to be free, right? Human beings, human nature, we want to be free. But there's a slight misconception here because people think they're actually free. Because the reality is no human being's free. We're not free from any perspective if we think about it. We're all slaves and in submission to one thing or the other. Some of us are slaves to our own desires. Some of us enslave ourselves to money. Some of us enslave ourselves to materialism. We want to buy. You know, I have an iPhone, but you know, it's a bit old, I want the new version. You know, I've got the new version, but I want an iPad now, it's a bit bigger. Yeah? You know, that's not doing it. I want something else now. I just get another laptop. I've already got a laptop, but it's fine, I'll get a new one. I need a bit more RAM. Yeah, all these unnecessary things, this materialistic mindset that we've developed. Yeah? We're all slaves. The reality is we're all slaves to something or the other. But what Islam is giving you, Islam is saying this, look, the reality is you're slaves. Choose your slavery. Either you're a slave to the creation or you're a slave to the Creator. But the profound thing is when you enslave yourself to the Creator, it truly frees you. It truly liberates you, because when you enslave yourself to the Creator, you're no longer a slave to these ephemeral, empty, physical things. You're not a slave to materialism. If you have something, you say Alhamdulillah, thank God. If you don't have it, you say Alhamdulillah. You're no longer a slave to these things. You're a slave to the Creator, and it frees you, it truly frees you. So if you want true freedom and liberation, Islam gives you this. It's just a matter of seeing it in the right perspective. So moving on. Another reason God is necessary, I would claim, in the 21st century, or in any century for that matter, is because God is the only transcendental anchor to validate objective moral values and duties. Now, what do I mean by objective moral values and duties? When I'm saying objective, what we mean is absolute, unchanging, no matter regardless of time, place, or wherever it may be. I, for one, believe objective moral values and duties do exist. I believe it's absolutely objectively wrong to murder an innocent child who hasn't done anything. I also believe it's objectively, morally wrong to rape. I believe this, and I'm sure many of us here, if not all of us, hopefully believe this. But to claim that objective moral values and duties exist, and to claim that what I've just said is objectively wrong, you need to accept the existence of God in the first place. Why do I say this? Because in the absence of God, what do you have to fall back on? What do you have to anchor your moral values and duties in? Let's think about it. All you have in the absence of God is evolution or social pressure. Two things. And if we look at both of them, they both render morality subjective or relative. If our moral values and duties have evolved, just like a hands, feet and teeth have, they're relative to that. They will continue to change and evolve over time. And they have done. That renders them non-objective. You can't claim they're objective then. If they're based on social pressure, again, they're subjective. Depending on the group of people or the individual as to what they decide is right and wrong. You can have a group of people somewhere in India who decide it's right to kill everyone over the age of 70. You can have the same number of people in the UK who may say, no, it's not, it's wrong. Do you see? It's subjective. Is there subjective opinions? How could one condemn the other? It's impossible. It's subjective. In the absence of God, you cannot claim objective moral values and duties. Again, this is something we could probably go into a bit more in detail in the Q&A. But to summarize, what we're saying is that we know objective wrong and right exist. There are things that are objectively wrong and there are things that are objectively right. But to claim objective anything, we need to accept the existence of God. Because in the absence of God, it's all subjective and relative. Now moving on, I've probably got my hair somewhere. So moving on, basically, the next thing I want to address is from a sociological perspective. Right? What does it mean? Why is God relevant from a sociological perspective? The argument I want to make is that religious people, people that believe in a creator or in a supreme being or are more spiritual, have higher rates of giving charity. They have lower rates of depression. They have lower rates of alcohol abuse. They have lower rates of drug abuse. They have all of these things. And this is something that these studies are showing, and there's many studies that have been conducted. And over again, these studies are showing this. That religious people, people that believe in a creator, that are more spiritual, have all of these features. They do all of these things. They give more charity, they're less depressed, they drink less alcohol, they do use less of abusive substances like drugs and so on and so forth. And I would argue this is because it gives you a moral incentive. It gives you a purpose, like we discussed earlier. It gives you a meaning. It gives you a reason for your existence. You're not just an accident. Now, there's many studies, for example, I'll share some of them with you now. For example, you've got surveys by Gallup, the National Opinion Research Center, and the Pew organization, who concluded that spiritually committed people were twice as likely to report being very happy than less religiously associated people. You've also, in 2001, by Schnitzker, in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion, examined a data set of 2,836 people, adults, from a general population, and found that religiousness was a buffer against distress and depression. And the studies go on. We've got in 2002, Smith and McCullough and Paul, in their journal, a meta-analytical review of the Religious Depression Association, evidence for main effects and stress buffering effects, carried out an analysis of over 200 social studies, and found that high religiousness predicted a lower risk of depression, drug abuse, and fewer suicide attempts. And the list goes on. There are several studies that show this and support this. So that's another reason why God is relevant, not only in the 21st century, but in any century. Now, to conclude, I'd just like to share one more thing with you guys. And that is the Quran in particular, or Islam in particular, has the solutions to many of the problems we face in the 21st century. But the reality is that there's this whole sort of facade, there's this whole smokescreen at the moment against Islam. Everything we hear in the news, in the media, and so on and so forth, generally is negative. Right? Generally, you see a man with a huge beard screaming, frowning, and just shouting at the screen. That's what you see. And the masses, when they see this, they go out into the streets and they see guys here saying it with beards and the sisters with their hijabs, and they freak out. They get scared. And it's not their fault. It's not their fault. This is what's been programmed. This is how people are being programmed these days. So the reality is we need to look beyond this shallow perspective and dig a little deeper as human beings. Study Islam a bit further, right? Not just from a shallow perspective, but look into it far more deeper, and what you will realize, and I'm not claiming that I know everything about Islam. I'm studying myself. But what you realize is that Islam has the solutions. Islam provides solutions. I'll give you one example. Let's take the economic system, for example. When the recession happened recently and the economic crisis, economists from around the world gathered and they said, we need to look into Islamic finances more seriously because the Islamic banks were coming out on top. Why? I'll give you one example. Just one example. Because Islam removes interest from the society. It abolishes interest. What does this mean? It means that there's more money that's freed up to implement back into the society. Right? Not only this, Islam introduces the system of zakah, which means every year, the Muslims, we give a certain percentage of our wealth to the poor. It encourages sadaqah, charity. Again, distribution, giving. And this is what Islam does. It opens up the money. It's not based on the current system we live in where what it dictates is that there's not enough resources and there's too much, the necessity is too high. Your needs are too much and there's not enough resources. This is what we're being told. This is what we've been told to believe. And this is why there's so much competition. In the West especially, we're competing with each other. This whole materialistic perspective, we want more, more, more. We're never satisfied. We're never satisfied. When at the same time, around the world, there's people in humanity, little children, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, little children dying of starvation. According to some reports, there's over 20 million children dying every few years. 20 million children dying because of starvation. What's going on? What's going on? At the same time in the West, we've got almost the same number of people dying from obesity-related diseases. It's out of balance. Something's wrong. You got people dying from obesity in the West, and at the same time you have people dying from starvation in other parts of the world. And we know from certain studies that there are there's enough calories on this planet to feed 3 planets over. There's enough calories on this planet to feed 3 planets over. This is the reality. But it's because of this system that we live amongst, that we're engulfed by. We don't see this reality. We're blind to this. The world, everyone could be fed. And this is the reality, but we don't see this. Islam provides the solutions. And this is just one example. One example, Ali radiallahu anhum, a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said something profound once. He said, when you see a poor person, don't blame Allah. Don't blame God. Blame the oppressor who created the system by which this person doesn't receive the money, or doesn't receive the funds, or what he needs. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he made clear what the basic needs of a human being are. Food, shelter, and clothing. Every human being has a right to have these things, and should have these things. But in the world we live in, many people don't. Many people don't. And the reality is we need to look. So in conclusion, what I'm trying to say is this. As Muslims, as non-Muslims, we have to look at Islam on a deeper level, look past this media narrative, and study Islam, because Islam has the solutions. Whether you believe it's from the Creator or not, it's irrelevant. Look into it, because there are solutions there, present, which can help the world we live in today. I thank you for listening. I'll conclude this. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.